couple of quick housekeeping notes before we start. If you can move towards the middle of the room so that people who come in late can get seats at the back, that'll be great. Two other announcements. There's an informal birds of a feather area immediately after the breakout sessions from 5:30 to 8:30, which is you can hang out and chat with people who are interested in similar things. This is up on the third floor by the cafeteria. And do stick around for the after hours tonight from 6 to 10, which is on level 3 where the keynote was this morning. There's food and drinks, and Flight of the Conchords will be performing. So, welcome to the URLs of People 2 session.
So yeah, we'll be talking about kind of URLs being first-class citizens, first-class identifiers, and the social graph API and how you can use it on your website. So we'll kind of be bouncing back and forth. Kevin will start with some background about why we're even here, why we're talking about this. Then I'll talk about the social graph API kind of in depth, what it actually does, which both 1 and 2 by themselves, aren't really substantial. But then once we get to the third part, we'll talk about how you can actually do something fun with it, something useful.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about cloud computing, but where does this come from? The cloud computing comes from internet structure diagrams. When we draw a diagram of the internet, we draw the net as a cloud that connects people. Because the idea of that is we don't care what's going on inside it. You can just send a message in one side, it comes out the other side, and as a programmer, you don't care what's going on in between. And that's an enormously freeing thing. It means that you don't have to worry about where computers are and what's connected to what. There's a cloud around it that hides that from you because it's like somebody else's problem field. Someone else is worrying about that. You don't have to think about it yourself. So TCP/IP did this for the net, and HTTP did this for documents on the net. And what happens is once you make this abstraction available, once you put a cloud around something, because the programmers can ignore it, they build it into the way their systems work, and that means other people can ignore it too. So the people who use the web don't see the cloud at all. That it's just it's oxygen for them. It's just part of their world. This is my son Andrew, and I was sitting with him one day, and he said, "Did you have Cartoon Network on the TV when you grew up when you were my age?" And I said, "No, when I was your age, I lived in the UK. We had the BBC. There were 2 channels. They were black and white. There was nothing on in the daytime, and we had 2 hours of children's programs on in the evening." And he was like, "Wow, I bet you're on the net a lot then." So he couldn't understand that it couldn't be there. So there's this sort of generational thing where we start out abstracting something away. People grow up used to that. But there's the sort of generation before that who fear this change and are worried about this cloud escaping from their pipes and want to stuff it back in again. And we've seen a lot of that with a net regulation. But the question is, my generation is having one of those senior moments at the moment over social networking. Social networking is this sort of swirling, complicated, cloudy thing that they don't quite get because they're used to email addresses. But social networks have been around for quite a long time. There's a timeline here that Dana Boyd put together, and you can see that we've had sort of 10 years of this, and Brad's been doing it for 8 years. You can see LiveJournal starting up there in '99. So there's a lot of history here, but suddenly in the last year or so, this thing has popped up into the mainstream. And suddenly people are discovering there are all these social networks out there that are like different countries to us, because we've been to 1 or 2 of these places. We sort of know our way around some of them, and we may have friends who've told us about these other places, but we don't really have a feel for each of them. They're sort of alien places to us. And the other part is that as people have moved to these social network places, they stop thinking about themselves as email addresses. If you're as old as me, then you remember when email was this wonderful, fresh new thing where you could communicate with anyone in the world, and you got interesting messages, and then gradually it sort of decayed and filled up with spam. But the younger generation, they don't see it that way. It's always been full of crap for them, and there are better things that they can use.
Yeah, I mean, my brother is just starting college right now, and I called him up when I was moving some of my mail server stuff around, and I wanted to make sure he had the right settings. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I think I have 2 of those. I don't really use it." We're referring to as email addresses, and I'm like, that just blew my mind that he's 18 in college and doesn't really use email, and he didn't really know his settings or what his emails were. So
they don't think about themselves as email addresses. They think about themselves as URLs. Because they use URLs for social networking sites, URLs for weblogs. And there's a lot of sense to this, because email is basically the wrong way around. The affordance is backwards. If someone has your email address, they can send you stuff. And that's all they can do, really.
It's like write only or spam only. There's no...
Right.
No one runs finger servers anymore. There's no way to give it an email address, find out anything about it. And URLs are kind of the opposite.
Yeah, URLs are the other way around. A URL, if I have your URL, I can find out stuff from you. I can't actually bother you with it. And that's a valuable thing that people are getting comfortable with. So if out in the web at the moment, there's the assumption that the web is a web of documents, but actually some of these documents are people as well. And once the documents become people, the links become relationships between people. And there's different kinds of relationships. There's relationships that say, this is also me. A is the same person, even though he's on different sides. And here's friends of mine. And there are some standards for covering those. So the Social Graph API is taking this view of the web as a web of people. And
here's what we've
done.
So when I got to Google, kind of looking for a project, and this had been bothering me for a while, and Google has this convenient thing where they just have a copy of the web sitting on the file system. So I wanted to go play with it and parse out all this information, all this, XFN and FOF, all these relationships between people. So basically, it just uses the existing Google crawler and Google index and stuff, but it goes and parses out formats like XFN and FOF, which I'll talk about, and builds a massive directed graph and keeps that up to date. And then the Social Graph API lets you query that. You could basically just, we'll go through some examples later, but given a node or nodes, find all the edges out or the edges in, or transitively follow the me links and find the clusters. So XFN and FOF. XFN is dead simple. Those 6 or 7 characters, like rel equals me, it's all you really need to say, that is my other account, and that's now machine readable. This is a micro format called XFN. Or if you want to link to a friend, rel equals friend, or rel equals acquaintance, coworker, contact. There's 13 or so of them. That's really lightweight. You could add that in your templates today. Or if you prefer the semantic web RDF type format, there's FOF. It's a lot heavier weight, but it's kind of richer. Whatever, use one, use both. Please don't use neither. If you have public data, make it machine readable. And then it'll just get picked up and be indexed. So I said directed graph, so I wanted to touch on that more. On some social networking sites, the relationships are reciprocal, and you always have to confirm it, and they make this undirected edge then between two people. But I would argue in real life, relationships aren't symmetric like that. I could think Kevin's my friend, but he hates me. He just pretends to be nice to me at work. But the web also is very asymmetric. If you had to get permission every time you made a link to somebody, the web would not have grown that much. I definitely don't reply to all the people that mail me and say, hey, can I link to your website? And I just, yeah, sure. I'm not going to reply. Just make a link. So in this example, maybe A1 links to B and says, B's my friend. Great. That's one directed edge. In this case, in the Social Graph API, in the model of the big directed graph of relationships, this is really 2 edges. The art person that made this originally drew it as 1 edge with 2 arrowheads, but it's really, I list you as a friend and you list me as a friend, and maybe they have different metadata on it. One person says, you're my muse. The other one says you're a coworker or something. I don't know. Here's in this example, A1 claims to be A2, but maybe A1's a spammer, and it's just saying he's A2, whatever. In this set here, A1 and A3 are both confirming each other. There's a path between the two. So I'll talk more about, let's do the next slide. So in this example, imagine these are 5 websites of yours, maybe, MySpace, Facebook, Bebo, High Five, LiveJournal, whatever. And you have XFN links or OpenID delegate tag, which is essentially a me link, and we parse as a me link, or you have RDF or something. You have some sort of machine-readable hint or declaration that these are all me edges. Ignore this one at the bottom for now. I drew these green because this is the strongly connected subgraph. Basically, from any of these green ones, there exists a path to every other green one. If you start here, you can touch all of them, but you can't get back here. You can't follow this one around. This one, only has one edge going this direction, but you can go up here, over here, and here. So this green is kind of a happy set. If you want to make all your sites like me-linked, make sure that there's a path from every one to every other one. If you want to do like a hub and spoke topology or a massive ring, whatever. Just I have breadfits.com where I have a whole bunch of me-links to all my other accounts, and all my other accounts somehow have a link to breadfits.com. So I have like a hub and spoke thing going on. In real life, you'll have some that are kind of islands over here and little leaves. So let's play with some of these. This is a kind of a pretty HTML wrapper around the JSON API. It's only a JSON API with the JSON P callbacks. Let's see if this works. And oh, my pretty. Whatever. Okay, readable enough. So here, the API was hitting kevinmarks.com, and it found all his me links. Let's make this a little bit smaller so that shows up. It shows a bunch of his other accounts, and it found basically 12 URLs that were reachable via me paths. And the little score here is basically what percentage of his sites were reachable from this given starting point. So he had a path from here to 12 of his accounts of all 12. So we put that green as happy. And down here, there existed only, there was a path from kevinmarks.com to whatever this one was, Kevin Marks OpenID, but there's no path back from there to one of his other 12. So we kind of showed those as unhappy ones. And then this little demo app also shows all the inbound me links, where there's no path from Kevin Marks to one of these. These are just like little random ones on the side that are pointing in and saying there's me, some of which are actually him. This Crowdvine one is his, and he could be like, oh, yeah, I forgot to link that one, and he can make a path back out to it. Now it's in the strongly connected graph. Likewise, his Technorati one isn't linked in. But then there's sexguideforman.blogspot.com.
Which isn't me, just to be clear.
So this one actually is spam, and expect this. In practice, you will not ever do any useful query with the Social Graph API that looks at incoming claims to be you, because they're probably spam. There's a lot of that. But if you only look at outbound declarations and you follow transitively all these me links out, you could find these strongly connected clusters, and that's kind of like the unit of a person that you trust. So back here. Okay, so that was only querying the API for like kind of me links. The other thing you can do is query on one of these, like let's say, I don't know, that one was Kevin Marks, or this one's kevinmarks.com. No, Kevin Marks was strongly connected. So let's say Kevin Marks was one of these green ones, and we find all his other accounts, and then we also want to find all his friends on all his other accounts. So like, this is my little 20-second drawing with these are friends over here, those little gray guys, and we're going to find all of those. Actually, this was my account. Too big. So from breadfits.com, it found, like, here's my LiveJournal and all my LiveJournal friends. And there's, my Jaiku account and friends and Dig and Tribe and Pounce and Twitter and la, 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 la. So, yeah, basically, it found all my friends on all my accounts. And it found, all my accounts as well. So this is another thing it can do. It also shows, I think down here is all the inbound friendships. Like, somehow somebody had, like, some declaration that I'm their friend, but I didn't reciprocate it, and that shows up in the API down here as well. So, too much information there. So those were pretty HTML wrapped examples, but we can go and actually mess with the URLs and show the actual REST query and JSON output. So we made this little kind of parameter playground which just constructs URLs. So we'll just do this once, and then we'll mess with URLs. This is basically all the API does. This is the fme equals 1 option. Basically, do you want to transitively follow me links starting from the ones you queried? Do you want to show inbound links? Do you want to show outbound links? And that doesn't matter if they're friend or me links. That just shows any links of that type. That's pretty output on. That's just the pretty print. And we'll talk about the normalized URLs in a second. So let's just do the me one. So the URL, which you probably can't see, is social graph APIs Google.com, lookup, query equals breadfits.com, follow me, fme equals 1, pretty equals 1, and node JSON callback, whatever. You can use it from JSON P, so maybe we'll have JSON pfunc, and now we have that. So the canonical mapping is basically all the things you asked for and what the canonical version of that URL is, and that is also the key you use to look up in this returned nodes hash. So basically it returns an object with 2 keys, canonical mapping, which is a dictionary from what you asked for to what you should look up by, and then it has a dictionary of all the ones here. I guess here's my Skype that it found somewhere. There's my live journal, but you wouldn't get to this dictionary key right away. So somewhere down here there's yeah, there it is, breadphysics attributes on it. It found no attributes. It doesn't. It supports like attributes that it parses from both. Not hcard yet, but it will do hcard as well. Here's all like the claimed nodes. Basically, this is the transitive me set that it followed. So here's all my accounts and all my different stuff, and then all my other accounts and their properties and their edges and stuff like that. So we can modify this URL and say we also want edges out equals 1. This will be a much bigger page, and now it has, all my friends and the edge types, like a friend or me or whatever. So another quite long document. So there's no developer keys required. You can use it in HTML or from your server. It's designed to be very low latency, so you can do this synchronously with your users hitting your website if you have some, like 250 millisecond, goal that you shoot for on all your HTTP requests. That's why this supports a whole comma-separated list of things up here that you can query a bunch of things at once, so you don't have to do lots of round trips. So I kind of briefly showed the canonicalization, but let's talk about that. Basically, the web is a mess, and you have to kind of massage it and clean it up a little.
LiveJournal certainly is.
Yeah, well, I decided to pick on LiveJournal because it's pretty bad, but there's some other sites that will remain unnamed that are even worse. So, for instance, people can have a rel equals me link to all of these URLs, and these are all my LiveJournal accounts URLs. Maybe it's something as simple as the HTTP canonicalization, whether there's a trailing slash there, the implicit port explicitly specified, or case. But then also LiveJournal has the profile URL like that. So somebody might think that's the best way to link to me, or maybe they think my RSS or Atom are the best way to link to me, or LiveJournal's old style URLs, with a tilde there, or LiveJournal without the www, which also works with /usersbrad, or maybe the old style user profile URLs, whatever. So we released this library called the SG Node Mapper that is open source. People are using a Plaxo. Mr. Smar, sitting up here in the front row, has contributed quite a bit to it. 6 Apart has, and it basically knows about all the major sites and not so major sites as well, URL patterns, and just tons of regular expressions and code that parses them all. And the fun thing, though, is it's implemented in JavaScript, not because it was supposed to ever run in a browser, although you could, but because it's kind of like the perfect little embedding language. We use it from both Java and C++, and the test suite for the whole thing is written in Perl, and that uses it via the SpiderMonkey, JavaScript : SpiderMonkey. Plaxo uses it via PHP using SpiderMonkey and the C++ API. So I don't know, it was kind of surprised me, but it's a fun language to use for embedding. So like I said, all these ugly things canonicalize down to this somewhat arbitrary format. I just picked SGN because I wanted something that looked like a URL so I could use it with other URL libraries and kind of parse it, but it's kind of arbitrary. Basically, the two components here are there's the host and the identifier. Or let's say on Flickr, you have like 2 URL formats, or I mean, you have more than 2, but let's pick these 2. You have kind of this ugly one where there's this user chosen identifier, or you have this one, or this is the user chosen one, this is the system one. So we map that to either PK or ident, where PK is like the primary key and ident is something that could change. So you often have both on a site, and we canonicalize it down to whatever we can get just from the URL. But then inside the social graph API, we maintain equivalence mappings between these that Kevin Marks is currently this one. Maybe there could be a new Kevin Marks in the future. I don't think Flickr allows reuse, but some sites do let you reuse usernames. So we update the table to maintain the mapping between these. So details, but The library also goes the other direction. So you have all these ugly URLs, like all these LiveJournal variants that all go down to this one SGN thing. But then we can also produce HTTP URLs from the SGN one to find what is the profile page. And there's basically 6 or 7 of these function names to find profile content, where content is the best URL for a certain site. On MySpace, it may be the profile page. On Blogger, it may be the actual blog or something like that. So there's a listing for all the sites with the kind of the reference pages. The RSS, the Atom, maybe the Add a Friend link is one of them. So you can use this library if you want, or you can ignore it. We can go back to a browser here and kind of we query, for instance, livejournal.com. Oh, that's a good one. We'll use that. So I searched for bradadenga.com. I searched for 3 things comma separated here, which you may not be able to see up there. But I searched for bradadenga.com, which canonicalized to mail to, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can search for XMPP, or whatever. I searched for livejournal.com users Brad, and it canonicalized that to brad.livejournal.com. So what you're seeing here is it didn't just do some HTTP canonicalization. It parsed that down to the SGN and then brought it back to the definitive HTTP one. So, same answers down there. But if you're actually using the social graph node mapper library, you can add SGN = 1 to any of your queries, and then all the things that you get back are in SGN form, which is the internal format. So by default, you can ignore it and just work in HTTP land. If you want it all pre-parsed, there's all my sites canonicalized down to the SGN forms, and all my friends. I guess I didn't request friends on this one, but edges out was 1. So there's all my friends with the, this is just the Unicode escape for the equal sign, so ignore that. All right, so after that little aside with canonicalization, just wanted to remind people that this is just a read-only API. It's pretty much nothing you couldn't do on your own with your own crawler and your own parsers, but that's kind of slow to do synchronously with your users' requests to crawl the web. So just consider this kind of read-only cache, and the web is actually the data source. There's no way to put a new edge in this. We don't have some secret repository of friend edges. And again, this is all public data. So
right, and part of the point of that is that people have done this before. People have built the crawlers that would go and gather this information. But then, A, it's slow for them, and then B, the other sites get fed up with being hit by lots of crawlers, whereas they're usually fairly happy with the Googlebot coming by. So we're piggybacking on Google's already indexing the web, and the usual rules about how to get out of the Google index, robots.txt and so on, apply. And similarly, how to get stuff into it apply by using sitemaps and the other Google tools for getting yourself indexed for all that.
Yeah. So this is kind of like the third phase of the talk, where we'll talk about how to actually use URLs and how to use the social graph API to do a couple arbitrary things that we thought would be good for a demo. So, I mean, suddenly you can imagine more complicated things, but they probably wouldn't fit in a few slides. So,
yeah. This guy reminds me of Brad for some reason. So we go back to thinking about the web as all these different countries and different places, and it's like, okay, no, I want to make my own social networking site. I don't want to join one of these. I want to make my own private island, and here it is. But the problem is you've got to get all these people who are members of the other sites to come in and tell you who their friends are again, and that's kind of hard. So, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this, Brad?
Well, pretty much any interesting website you make today is going to be some social website. And so you need access to the social graph somehow, and the problem is getting it. The historical thing everyone did was ask users for it again every time. Who are all your friends? And people got kind of sick of this, and then it moved to other things like getting it via container, whether that's Facebook or OpenSocial, somehow asking some containing environment for the world, or you import from their email address book or something like that, and you hope they don't do anything bad with your password if they're not using like OAuth or something. More likely, you'll do all of the above. Just kind of like the current state of things. But this talk, we'll talk about, people are pretty familiar with these first two. So we'll talk about how you use the social graph API and kind of maybe replace email import or do something with URLs instead of email import or in addition to. So I want to give a quick shout out to Doppler. I think I have their little sticker here on my laptop. Doppler is kind of, I think this was the site that pushed me over the edge as getting sick of redefining all my friends. They had a great little website tool where you basically say who your friends are, and it says what cities they're traveling in and what their flight schedules are. And so you just know that somebody that you know from the internet or some other city is going to be in your city, or if you're traveling somewhere, they're also going to be at the same conference or whatever. So it's great. They do one thing and they do it well, and it's a very focused tool. And but I didn't want to tell all my friends. I want to tell it all my friends again and maintain this friend stuff. And Doppler is very up on supporting all the latest toys and gadgets, so they're fun to work with as well. So I kind of think if you can, stretch the Unix philosophy or this analogy of the Unix philosophy of doing one thing and doing it well, you could kind of think of people in relationships as being like, the Unix equivalent to pipes. But in any case, there's always going to be some website like Doppler that does something better than you. Or there's going to be a ton of websites that do one thing well. So you could try to be a general site that does, photo hosting and friends and blogs and this, but some site will be decide to be focused. And so people are going to use more than one website. Don't pretend you're in this little closed world and your users will never leave, because they will leave. Why don't you just accept it and encourage it? So I want to do quick examples of sites that do kind of acknowledge the existence of the rest of the web. Twitter, there's my little link to bradfitz.com, and they actually mark that up with XFN. If you want to view the source, it would have rel equals me. So that's machine readable. There's LiveJournal's little other site and other URL, and that has rel me. Pounce lets you list a whole bunch of your other sites, as many as you want. Friendfeed, it's an aggregator, so I hope they list all your other sites, and so there's all my other sites. But they kind of all have the same problem of this massive UI to add all your. There's mugshot.org up here. But yeah, these massive UIs where it's almost as painful to list all your other accounts as it is to list all your friends. So one example we were going to show here is basically how to use the social graph API to alleviate some of this pain. So how about auto-suggesting to users the profile links that they should list on your site? So you probably already have some identifier for the user. Maybe they logged into your site with an email address, so you have that. That's an identifier that works with the social graph API. Not as well as URLs, but we do have email data in there. Or maybe they logged into your website with OpenID, so you have some URL for them. So you can have some page where they list their other accounts, and in the background you can hit the social graph API, and we come back and we say, here's all the other claimed sites, all the me links that are followed out, and you can suggest that. I showed this one earlier, so we'll skip that. But basically, that we had maybe 3 facts about the user that was logged in. Maybe they logged in with this OpenID, and they gave us this email address, and they also had already gone through one step and told us that was their Twitter. So we hit the API with that. It follows all the me links, and we can say, hey, do you want to also list your LiveJournal, or we have that one. You want to also list your Dig profile? And oh yeah, we hadn't even thought to click that link and add it on this massive page. Maybe you see all this and you get overwhelmed and you're like, oh, I do have a LinkedIn. I forgot about that. But the social graph API found the me link, and you're like, sure, I don't mind linking my LinkedIn from this other page. So that's one thing you could do. This is the picture that was in the docs on the social graph API docs on code.google.com, and it wasn't really expanded on much there. There was a really quick couple-minute video about it. But the idea is that you can have kind of a auto-suggest friends thing that works the same way as kind of like email address, like the address book import, but is instead based on URL. So imagine I had just joined Twitter and I have no friends, but it knows I had already told Twitter in that little top right bar what my other URL is, bradfitz.com up there. So when I said find or import friends on Twitter, it could hit the social graph API and say query equals bradfitz.com, follow me equals 1, and edges out equals 1, which would return my LiveJournal account as well as maybe my 20 other accounts. Find all of my edges out, all my friends on those ones, and find that I'm friends with Jane274 on whatever, let's say LiveJournal. And there's an e-link from Jane274 to Twitter called Jane. So notice these are different usernames on both sides of the Twitter and LiveJournal world, but there's these me links or friend links that circle all the way around. So then I could say, hey, you want to be friends with Jane? You're friends with her over on LiveJournal. And you're like, oh yeah, sure. I didn't know she was here. So we'll talk about how we do that, but we'll start with kind of a review of how importing from the email address book works. So this is my PowerPoint pseudocode. You get the user's address book. Hopefully you use OAuth or AuthSub or any of these kind of like passwordless authorization schemes. Everyone's kind of converging on OAuth.
Yeah.
So
use Google Contacts API that uses OAuth.
Does it?
It does. They shipped that recently.
Cool. So then you pretty much iterate over the address book, and for every email in there, you kind of look in your local database and say, hey, do I have a user ID that has that same email address and is verified? And you're like, hey, look, you should add them as a friend. And unfortunately, a lot of sites also do this step as well. Spam your friends that don't exist on that site and say, hey, I'm using this hot new website. You should try it. So let's replace this with URLs and see how it works. So instead of getting their address book, get their social graph, get their other URLs and their friends' URLs. So this is where the social graph API comes in for the public data. You might want to mix in some of their non-public edges from some social network-specific APIs. Maybe you hit the public social graph API first to find their other accounts, and then you have OAuth APIs or whatever, some other API for that site to get their friends on that site, merge the graphs, and then for every URL in there, you have some table on your side that is a mapping from URLs. So you have to have some index on your side to make this efficient that maps from URLs to your local user IDs. And you also want to make sure that the URL is verified. We'll talk about that in a second. And fortunately, this, whether it's a bug or a feature, I think it's a feature, you won't be able to spam the email address because you don't have it. All you have is a URL. And but maybe you can remember these URLs, and every time they log in or every once a day, see if new users that they're friends with have recently joined your website. And so the end result is the same, more connectivity, your denser graph, and get all the network effects and stuff. So we should do this out of order. We'll come back to that. URL verified. Just to kind of clarify why you'll want to make sure the URL is verified is some attacker could join your website and say, like, here's my email address, and maybe you verified that, and they say, oh, and my URL is bradfitz.com. If you just blindly have an index from bradfitz.com to attacker's user ID, then, one of my real friends, like, say, DaveMan692, comes in, and he says, hit the social graph API, find my friends, and they're like, oh, DaveMan692 is friends with bradfitz.com. Oh, we have that. Except for your table maps from bradfitz.com to the attacker's user ID. So how do you verify a URL? With an email address, everyone knows how to do that. You send some email with a magic token or something, you make them click it, and you're like, oh, okay, great.
Which isn't that easy. We're just habituated to it. Actually, It's like go and dig it out of the spam bucket and stress around, and then,
who knows how long email takes for people.
Get the line wrap wrong on the URLs and all that stuff. So it's actually a fairly painful process. But anyway.
So as far as with the URL, you can use OpenID if the URL supports OpenID and you know that. The social graph API can help telling you that as well. And I mean, that's all OpenID does is it's a mechanism to prove ownership of a URL. You can also hit the social graph API and find if there's a me path from the URL they said back to one of the ones you also know is verified. Maybe a path back to your own website for a new site. Or the traditional thing that people did was go modify your page and put this random token on it, and then we'll recrawl it or fetch it on the fly and see if you did put that magic token there. But as long as you're making the user go modify their page to add some random little piece of markup, might as well have that be something useful for other people, something machine readable. So I don't know whether it's OpenID delegate tag that I guess I won't explain, but or some XFN rel-me back to say yourself. Presumably you trust your own website, right? And that URL is already verified. So you could do something like this. Let's go back to demo 1. So I did a stupid little demo of this for somebody a while back and kind of forgot about it, and I should flesh it out. But this was all in JavaScript, and it's really kind of broken. But I still have debugging stuff there. But this goes and finds. Basically, it finds all my websites I use and all my friends on those, and it finds all their me links, and it shows me all the connections I have that I'm missing. Basically, for this user, he has all these other accounts that I have no me path to on any way. So this basically shows all the places in my social graph I should have connectivity that I don't.
No friend path, you mean?
Yeah, I have no friend path to them, even though I'm a friend with them on some website. Like, for instance, I didn't know Anil Dash, used Bebo and Delicious. Maybe I should be friends with him there. Also on Doppler. So you can imagine making this into a tool that isn't ugly, and having little like ad links or auto ad links, or maybe some grease monkey thing, or some desktop thing that knows your passwords for sites that don't know OAuth and stuff like that. But some friend synchronizer that runs on the user's own machine. So that was that needs to be improved, but that was kind of a little demo hitting the API. So
we should say that all these demos, the source is up on the web. So.
Yeah, this is all these URLs. Well, yeah, they're linked. Just it's in Subversion, so just check it out. Yeah. So I wanted to give props to Mr. Smar and Plaxo, sitting up here in the front row. They were one of the first people using the Social Graph API, and in general doing pretty awesome, innovative things with regard to user-centric identity and all this URLs instead of email addresses. So on Pulse, which is an aggregator, basically, you can go there never having an account, never giving them an email address, never making up a password, log in for the first time with OpenID, and you don't tell it what your websites are. You don't tell it your friends. It does its own crawling and now uses the Social Graph API, and then maybe does some manual crawling later. I don't know all the details, but I know they hit us. And they basically pre-populate all your other public sites and all your friends and start importing the RSS and Atom of all of those other sites. So you log in for the very first time, and all of a sudden all your stuff's there and all your friends' stuff there, and it's kind of awesome. So Joseph's doing a talk about this tomorrow, Thursday, 10 or 11 or something. So yeah, go see this. I'm probably going to go see what they're actually doing. But so in summary, URLs are useful. Emails aren't the only kind of identifiers for people, and in many cases, URLs are actually better ones and more common. There's more data out there on the web about people's URLs and URL equivalences because people aren't afraid to share those like they are with emails. And users are sick of re-entering all their friends and lately all their other sites because there's now aggregators and aggregators of aggregators and more aggregators. Check out friendfeed.com or something. That's a pretty funny site. So yeah, hit the Social Graph API, try it out. There's no developer keys, and you just hack the URL. It's kind of fun. And add XFN and FOF to your pages. If you have public data and you have some, you should probably also support OpenID and OAuth and all this other fun new stuff. But yeah.
But these ones are really easy to do.
Yeah, these ones are dead simple. So I think we will then switch to Q&A, if there are any questions. Yeah, are you close enough to the mic? Or we can repeat.
Yeah. Use the mic if you can, because then the question gets on the tape.
There's going to be a tremendous amount of resistance to this sort of effort by people who perceive that the value they're building in their business is getting the social network recorded in some fashion. And I'm curious what things you think can be done broadly to encourage people like Facebook and others to embrace a model that more closely approximates this.
You want to take it?
Well, part of it is providing value for it. So we hope that this API can help show that doing this in public is a useful thing, because you can then draw back on the pool of information on the web and reconnect back to it. And we've seen a lot of the sites who adopted these markup standards already were basically doing it as an act of faith because there wasn't anything to make sense of it out there. Now there is something that makes sense of it. They can see that there's value to doing that, and that will go back. It's also, there is a difference between publicly articulated stuff on the web and stuff that you're storing in a private store, like the Gmail Contacts API or some of the social network sites. And this is designed for the public stuff and to give you feedback on that. So it's mostly, it makes more sense when everyone does it, and it's an openness argument. And I think that things are moving that way. If you've been following the open social track and the stuff that's going on over there, more and more containers are signing up and saying, yes, we're interested in being part of the open web, not being a silo. So
there's always going to be a mix of public and protected data anyway. So
right.
I imagine anyone using this is probably also going to mix in the non-public data and use that mix on their own. Also, I wanted to point out that the API isn't just for end users or just for other websites. You could just as easily make a desktop tool that did all your aggregation of your friends or did your synchronization of your friend stuff on all your websites, including your protected ones. You give some local agent on your machine, your passwords for all your social network websites. It logs in, periodically, gets your friends list, hits the social graph API to cluster the URLs of all your different friends, and does the actions to add friends and remove friends from different sites. So end users could use this, desktop software, or websites can hit this server side to have some better experience. So who knows, anyone could use it.
Hi, my name's Jody from People Browser. We've been using your social graph API now for about a month, and it's fantastic. Thank you very much. So we're getting a Twitter fragment or some fragment of someone's ID, and then we're using social graph API to assemble a whole identity. Quite often, though, we only start with an email, someone's email, and we can feed that email into Flickr or some of the other containers that allow us to do an email search to then look up a URL, and then we can feed that into the social graph API, and then we end up at a good place. But sometimes we only have an email and we don't have anywhere to go. And we've started looking at Rapleaf. Are you familiar with Rapleaf? We quite like Rapleaf. I think I know the answer to this question, but are you going to add any sort of email integration? It seems that you don't really want to add in email integration for good reason, but there are quite often times when you need to start with an email.
Yeah, no, totally. So the social graph API works with email addresses and has them in there when they're on the web, which is pretty much never, right?
Correct.
It does. So I definitely want more email integration, and there's a couple. Okay, there's some random things I could talk about here. If you give it an email address, the first thing it'll do is map it to the info. There's the mbox SHA-1 sum, where basically they take the SHA-1 of mail2 : your email address, and you can put this in faux files, which is pretty much, it's a one-way declaration from that faux file saying, me link to the SHA-1 of email. But there's no way right now to basically make a me link from an email address to something else. If people did run finger servers, you could do, a finger lookup on the email address and then maybe have a little document that, had me links. I wrote a stupid little proposal a while back about how to do basically discovery on an email address and get some a XRDS simple document or something that could have me links or pointers to a URL, which could then have me links. I would like to see this adopted, but I need to talk to more people, and that's kind of a lot of politics and stuff that I know from OpenID work. But I think that could happen. Right now, the social graph API can return information from, if I did a query with my email address and said follow me, it would go from bradadenga.com to the SHA-1 to my LiveJournal. Basically, there's 5 or 6 people, websites right now that are marked as trusted as they only put the SHA-1 sum in their FOAP when that email address is verified. It's a stupid hack, but it at least makes a lot of email addresses then reachable, to expand out. I would like some way that I can remove that stupid hard-coding hack, but or maybe hit finger servers if people run them, or this, XRDS simple on top of a mail server. I don't know. People are talking about it. There's nothing concrete being implemented right now, but this bugs a lot of people as well. The other thing we could do is when you hit the social graph email API with an email address, we could theoretically go out and hit everyone else's APIs, Flickr,
exactly.
with that email lookup, merge the results back to you, and have these URLs. That requires, talking to all these sites that have this API and say, hey, can you handle this volume of traffic? But then you're also exposing email addresses to all these people, right? You can imagine you query on an email address, and we send it out to 500 people's APIs with this email address, and now one of them was untrustworthy, and now they're spamming you with it, right? So,
but you are adding value, because what's going on now for people like us is we're going out to each one of these APIs and we're hitting them up with the email address. And so there'll probably be 100 others like us. If you had essentially...
Yeah, but then you're giving away your users' email addresses, right? And not you're giving it to us, trusting us that it's a read-only API, and then we're going out and giving that email address to dozens of other people, and they're logging those email addresses and spamming them, right? So it's not something you can't do without like biz dev deals and like, maybe we'd really want to do a lookup on some salted digest of the email address, but then they would need those indexes with the right salt and all this stuff. So it requires, it goes down to some politics and some technical stuff and some biz dev. It's annoying, but it should happen.
The other thing, if you do look at the Google Contacts API, you can pass that an email address, and then you'll get an OAuth dialog with a user to confirm it. So that's a way of confirming that at least they've proved to Google that it is their email address. So you can use it for that purpose as well as for getting access to the contact stuff.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Max. So this is very interesting. Certainly, you guys have done a great job. But I'm just wondering if you thought about expanding this a little bit, because what you're doing essentially is you're trying to disambiguate people and their relationships and so on. But there's a bigger challenge, ahead. And the guy who invented the web have been talking about semantic web for a long time. And what you have, if you expanded it to instead of just a graph API to be a semantic API, and then proposing, for instance, standards for relating content so that when I go to Google I/O, I can relate it to a conference that's maybe at Wikipedia. So that now I could have the semantic API that I call and I say, hey, Google I/O, what is that? Right? Because I/O is input-output. Yeah. It has nothing to do with conference. But then you can tell me it's conference. And we could do even better where portions of the page are tagged like this.
No, I totally agree. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem with data and, using the data. And it just happened that this was a bite-sized chunk and the data already existed, so there was no chicken and egg problem. A lot of people have been publishing XFN info for years, like Kevin said, somewhat blindly trusting that something would consume it. And then I kind of realized that there was actually a lot of it out there, that it was just wanting to be parsed and played with. So I would love to see other social objects and more semantic data and semantic querying, the RDF graph.
Actually, don't keep it simple. Keep it just, micro formats and just giving an API to be able to retrieve that. Yeah. Because by virtue of you exposing this API, a lot of people, including myself, are going to go into my website and change it so that I can use that API. Right. So you're going to encourage more people to actually add that kind of extra metadata information.
Well, and one of the things Brad said in passing earlier that was worth repeating is that we wanted to add more attributes on there on the profile elements that we can pass out, and HCard is the logical next step for that.
It's going to help your search too, because then when you search for duck, there's all kinds of other information about that can return. You search for conferences and so on.
Yeah, there's all sorts of machine-readable data that we're parsing now and then throwing away because it doesn't fit into the very simplistic model right now. But I would love to say every RDF triple I see, save somehow and make it searchable in both directions. Mm-hmm. Right now, that's just kind of being thrown away if it's not related to people or relationships. But there's a whole lot more that can be done with this.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Karthik. So we've been sort of working on something very similar for quite some time now. Basically, where we want to aggregate people across social networks. Like I belong to 50 of them, and every day something or the other, right? So one of the things is, what if you were able to generate two different signatures for me, like one for my Facebook and one for like say my Orkut, one for like my MySpace, one for my Friendster, one for my Hi-Fi. And then, but if you look at the content, you can still disambiguate and say all this is probably the same guy, but from the URL you cannot. So have you come across such a case here, or
so there's no magic for like heuristics for disambiguating URLs and clustering them going on, unless there's an explicit me link, reciprocal, or there's some strongly connected set. It's not clustered. We don't look that like, it's the same approximate age and same location and same name, must be the same person. There's none of that going on. And I don't think that would be good anyway, because it's important that people are allowed to have multiple personas and have those totally separate. Everything I've been talking about here is assuming a user has one persona, but in reality they don't, right? They have a work persona, and maybe if you only have my work persona, you can't get to my personal persona. If you have my personal persona, maybe that's a strongly connected graph, and I have a couple one-directional me links to my to my work persona. So from my personal persona, if you know those accounts, you can get to my kind of work public accounts. But you can't go the other way. If you only know me in a business professional context, right, you won't find my drunken MySpace photos or something like that, right? So I don't think magic heuristics for disambiguating things would be good, because that would be surprising for users, that their walls between personas would magically disappear sometimes.
Right. I mean, that's something that really upsets people when you make connections they're not expecting.
Not when you're not expecting. Like, say, for example, I have 50 friends on Facebook. I have, some 170 friends on Orkut, right? Now, I don't want to log into both of them every day. I just want to log into, one place, and then it's going to sort of aggregate both my friends together and say, hey, these two guys are the same, because, from a whole bunch of... And say, for example, you share your drunken photos with me on MySpace as well as your professional stuff, right? Then what's the harm then in saying, oh, these both people are the same?
Well, I think that's the job of an aggregator, to do, whether that's Pulse or Friendfeed, for you to group two people.
Right.
If you know this identifier for a person, and you know this identifier for a person, you may know them in two different contexts, two different personas, and you're allowed to tell your aggregator that they're the same person and they should be treated as one entity. But that machine-readable data doesn't actually exist on the web linking the two as the same person.
Right, because they may have people in one context they don't want to connect to in another context. People do use social network sites for segmenting, just as they use email addresses for segmenting. They have a home address and a work address, and they may have a mailing list address, and they may have other email addresses. They do the same thing for social network sites. And while we can sort of say, well, that's a sort of messy behavior, it's a behavior that people do for a reason, which is they want to keep parts separate, and they will actually sign up for different services to do that. And we don't want to violate their sort of assumptions of the world in that way. But the point of the Readonly stuff and the FOF stuff is that they can declare that these are the same things and connect them themselves explicitly. And there are a bunch of sites that help you do that to correlate your usages, so that we can then draw on that and feed that back to others. So I understand the frustration from a developer point of view, and to some extent from a user point of view, but you've got to be careful that you're keeping other people's trust relationships in mind when you're doing this. And we're, at Google, we're really careful about that, because we have a lot of trusted data from people in Docs and in Gmail and in lots of other accounts that they have at Google. We don't want to connect those in ways that people aren't expecting.
And this is why when we launched the Social Graph API, we made sure we, if I could find it, we did that one pretty HTML page that let people, this follow me one, just so we didn't want people freaking out thinking, oh my God, Google has access to all the relationship data and all my other accounts on the web, but there's only some weird programmery JSON API, and so they're basically sharing all my secret data with other programmers and not telling me what they have. And that was a concern. We didn't know in what ways people would be paranoid. So we built this little tool that's kind of somewhat readable by a regular human that kind of shows here's the information on the web and what links are out there declaring these me equivalences. Maybe I don't know, let's pick. Maybe your Flickr one was supposed to be private or something, but you accidentally put your email address in there, and unbeknownst to you, Flickr was linking that with a micro ID or with Readonly or an OpenID delegate or something. There's some invisible to a human thing that was only in the source that we parsed out, and we set up this me link, and that would be surprising to you. So this was for end users to go double check that their connectivity is how they assumed their connectivity was. So.
One quick question. Any thoughts on similar things for connecting any resource? Social graph, saying, oh, this API is probably Google Maps API is friends with the Picasa API, so that or something like that, so sort of similar way of associating any two resources on the web, so that I can navigate better. I search for one API, and then I can say potential APIs that people think are good that I can use with this to create cooler mashups, things like that, linking any two resources using these tags. Not just people, just resource.
So there is discoverability inherently within URLs, and as we add more attributes, that will get easier. So we've got attributes now for getting feeds and things and photographs. You didn't do the photo demo, did you? So if the FOF file can express a photographic link, so you can get Brad's picture by looking up his URL and stuff like that. And we expect to see more of that as there are more public versions of that, and as we expand the attributes we can derive from the web. So that will then naturally connect to other places. As you said, HCard is the obvious logical next step for this. HCard is the microformat that expresses basically a business card type thing, but that has geographic data and stuff in it as well. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I mean, so we parsed out, I don't know what you're exactly talking about, but yeah, we parsed out this photo attribute and on Brad.LiveJournal. It was actually in a FOF file or something, and then it canonicalized down to here. But yeah, we intend to have more attributes and stuff. So I would love to see some of the mashups people do with all this. There is one that somebody put a little JavaScript you dump on your page, and it finds every link on the page and hits the social graph API with that. And if there's a photo attribute, shows a little inline, 50 by 50 image photo of the person next to any link to their thing. I mean, it was kind of just a trinket, but it was cute. And so it surprised me. I didn't expect it. So.
Thanks.
Hi, Charles from PixFirst. I had a quick question. I apologize if you've talked about this before. Can you give any information about the size of the data set that you're seeing currently in the social graph or any potential trends about how fast it's growing?
So I've been talking to people just recently about permission to publish some more numbers on, well, I guess any numbers because we haven't said any, but there's some sensitivity regarding that in that we don't want to we pretty much know then the basically relative sizes of all the social networks, which sometimes they consider private. So we don't want to go and say, here's the 7 social networks ranked by number of users and connectivity and all this stuff. So we probably, I can say that there's a lot more XFN data, probably by a factor of 10 on the web than FOF. The FOF tends to be better and richer, but there's just less of it in volume. It's about the only thing I could say right now. But yeah, I do want to get some numbers, and I've talked to people, and they're like, yeah, that's probably cool. Put up some numbers. But I have to run it by people too. I mean, I don't want to do it on my own.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Could you clarify how the canonical mapping and SGN namespace finds and supports new websites which have user IDs?
So basically, I run a MapReduce periodically that looks at all the node labels, all the URLs that are not SGN. And if there's a site that is, I have it sorted by the domain name or whatever, I look at it and I'm like, oh, wow, they have lots of social data, but I don't know their URLs, and I write a little parser for it. So I think we have pretty much every large notable site on the web. We have a lot of small ones. People send in patches for their own small sites that maybe only have 50,000, 10,000 users, but we have rules for it.
So it is possible to contribute.
Yeah, it's open source.
Show the project.
Code.google.com/p node mapper. Big. So.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could kind of hit an example one. There's a whole bunch of stuff under. Here's embedding, so you can embed it in those languages. There's the Perl lib social graph node mapper thing, and here's a bunch of rules for sites. A lot of sites are in their own file, Facebook URLs or MySpace's URLs. Maybe we go look at one of those. Is that readable? I don't know. So basically, you register handlers to parse things and to create things, and then at the bottom of the file is the kind of test suite for this file. And so, this isn't obviously JavaScript, but there's a pre-compiler that goes and makes a master golden test suite file, and then there's something that compiles all this down to one compact JavaScript file. But yeah, so most of it I think is in simple.js, which Mr. Smart edited most recently. Yeah, this has just tons of sites in it, and tons of tests at the bottom. So generally, most of the time you can parse a site with just regular expressions. Sometimes you need to get into some code. So it's a mix of regular expressions and code to parse all this stuff.
Especially when there are historic identifiers you need to map through.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of logic for that kind of stuff.
So I'm Paul. I'm from Berkeley. Are you thinking about building a generalized thing like robots.txt so that sites could do this for themselves?
Yeah, yep. I want basically, so this is all JavaScript, and it's sandboxed in SpiderMonkey world, and it has access to only the environment you give it in JavaScript. So yeah, I want a way for sites to be able to link to a JavaScript file that has a well-defined entry point in the same way as the WPAD files, the web proxy auto configuration files. Basically, you have some JavaScript. Here's one well-known entry point function name. We give it a URL. You give back out an SGN formatted thing. And if you take too many CPU cycles or you crash or whatever, it's just ignored. If you're well-behaved, then yes. So basically, yeah, I want people to be able to declare their parsing rules on their site, and then we would pick that up and use them.
That would be very cool. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I think we have 41 seconds, so I think we're good. So thank you all.